I opened my phone and read the message while they walked away. This plan was made by my wife. I'm sorry. I can't do anything. My son's name floated across the screen like a verdict. They wheeled my suitcase toward the curb, kissed me on the cheek like you kiss a coat goodbye, and left me under the airport lights with nothing but the echo of their footsteps. No ticket, no return, no look back, just a text and a body that wanted to crumble. Support me by subscribing to our channel. I did not collapse in the terminal. I sat on a plastic bench until dawn, watching people move in their orderly lives, watching announcements flicker above the departure gates. Planes landed and lifted like indifferent gods. The world kept functioning while my world had been put on a conveyor belt and pushed away. When the cleaners came and the coffee shops opened, I took my small bag and walked out into the morning light. I had a decision to make the moment. My breath fogged in the cold air. Vanish and let them have the narrative, or survive and take back whatever dignity they thought they could throw away. They wanted me gone. They wanted distance and a clean cut. But distance is not the same as erasure. I left the airport with nothing but clothes on my back and a mind that began to count options like a ledger. First, practical things. A place to sleep that night, money, a plan. I found a small hostel, paid cash for a bunk and a shower, and for the first time since the verdict text, I allowed the tears to come. Slow, steady, rage in them but also a cold. Surgical clarity forming under the pain. They left their signatures on my life. I would leave mine on theirs. I did what any woman who has been pushed into survival does. I rebuilt a life one small, stubborn thing at a time. No melodrama, no grand proclamations. I worked. I took cleaning shifts, then a barista job, then a temporary office gig. I saved when I could. I learned the rhythm of lesser bills and the dignity of being responsible for your own heat and water. It is a humiliating grace to be poor by choice when once you had comfort, and an even greater grace to find that you can survive anyway. But survival was a foundation, not the goal. The plan they had hatched, leaving me at an airport, letting the world assume I had been abandoned by my son, was both cowardly and clever. They counted on shame to do half the work. They counted on me to crumble in public view. They counted on distance turning into oblivion, so I would make sure distance didn't become oblivion. I kept the receipts of everything I could. A name here, a date there, a casual mention to the wrong person that became valuable information. They left fingerprints all over what they built together, and fingerprints can be followed. Months passed. I learned how to read a world you are not allowed to inhabit anymore. How to find the people who knew the places they loved. How to piece together days into a pattern. They had been careless with each other. Lovers often are at the start, so certain of secrecy that they forget small information is a trail. I followed that trail. I found their new address through a woman who ran the dry cleaner they used. I learned the months they left the city. I saw their wedding photos, the ones they'd posted like trophies. And in those glossy smiles I found the brittle seam of arrogance that comes from assuming no one will look closely enough. I was not naive. I knew that confronting them with a suitcase of righteous rage would be theatrical and perhaps hollow. The revenge people dream of in private is often a sudden moment of truth. A shout, a scene, a vindicating film clip. But television revenge is not as satisfying as the kind that grows slowly and insidiously, the kind that rearranges the very floors of their comfortable life so They cannot sleep on their bed without feeling the tremor under it. I wanted them unsettled. I wanted them to feel the long domestic consequences of the life they'd stolen from me. So, I became careful. I documented. I saved messages, photographed their public social media posts with timestamps, and where necessary, paid attention to shifting patterns. The rent receipts, the car registrations, the places they frequented. It sounds small, and maybe it was small for a while, but small things gather. A cigarette butt, a receipt shoved in a pocket, the voicemail of someone who revealed a late-night plan in passing. All of it is a map if your hands know how to hold it. There is a peculiar calm that comes when you know where to look. I found them in a coastal town one autumn, sitting behind a cafe window, their hands habitually linked. The scene was the banal kind of happiness they wanted to present. Small glasses clinking, a sun hat, the casual tenderness of people who believe their sin is shielded by time and distance. I watched them for hours, pretending to be a stranger with a camera. They did not look up. They did not know I had arrived at the edge of the life they thought they'd built on my absence. Finding them did not settle anything. It was a starting gun, not a finish line. I went home that night and plotted like a quiet engineer. I made no threats. I left no anonymous notes. I let the world do the heavy lifting. The truth is, people have rules. Institutions have even more rules. When truth is fed gently to the right places, it seizes hold. My first move was legal. I traced property records and bank names. My second was social. I found people who had ties to them that were fraying, so they would be willing to listen to a small factual account that connected the dots. Third, I started to make my presence known in more formal ways, but civilly. I wrote to landlords with receipts I had recovered. I sent notarized documents to banks showing my ownership of items and properties that had been moved to their names. I did not scream. I did not lie. I made the system inconvenient for them until it became unbearable. It was delicious to watch the slope of their confidence erode. At first, it was tiny things. A check held up for verification, a small delay in a bank transfer, a friend's polite distance at a dinner. Then it were calls from collection agencies when bills posted to their name turned up unpaid, because they'd moved assets to shell accounts that needed paper trails I now had in hand. I am not proud of the pleasure I took in those moments, but pleasure has a way of seeping into practicality. They'd counted on cowardice. They hadn't planned for an old woman's patience. You have to be precise with that sort of work. Once I sent a copy of a note, an old promissory document that had been conveniently misplaced, through regular mail to a lawyer he used. The letter prompted an internal inquiry. That inquiry bled into others. Banks asked questions. Partners read the wrong footnote and paused. That pause is corrosive. You can see it in the way confident men begin to check their emails twice, their gait shortened by anxiety. I followed each pause with a small nudge. Another receipt here, the name of a minor investor there. A public note about a delayed licensing application. And the net tightened. They tried to be clever in turn. My son, who had promised in youth that he would never be the type of man to turn his back, tried to buy new facades. He took part-time work, gave a speech at a small community event where he smiled as if the world had forgiven him. His wife, with the soft arrogance of someone who felt she had won the moral lottery, posted a standing photo of them in front of their new house with the caption, "New Beginnings." I screenshot it and checked property registries. A new house, yes, but under an LLC with a partner, a name not quite theirs. These are the half answers that break people. Not one bombshell, but a consistent, methodical dismantling of conveniences they'd assumed were permanent. There were nights when I wondered if I had become the very thing I despised. I thought of my mother, the woman who had fed me as a child, who had once mended my dresses with a devotion you can only know if you slept warm and full. She had taken that trust and trampled it at the altar of a new romance. Yet seeing her older now, slow, hands shaking as she poured tea, invited to fewer luncheons, made a complicated sorrow swell in me. She was not only the enemy, she was also a woman who had made catastrophic choices. I kept my distance, however. Centuries of nurture unwind slowly, but consequences must be faced. There is a difference between cruelty and boundary setting. I had learned which one I was practicing. The final unraveling wasn't a dramatic raid. There were no dramatic TV-style confrontations where the truth explodes at a dinner party. It was paperwork and people and the steady collapse of the scaffolding they'd built. One by one, partners withdrew from his ventures because compliance reviews showed discrepancies I had pointed out. One by one, friends reduced contact. The neighbors who used to smile when his car pulled into the driveway stopped by less often. The garden parties she used to host dwindled to polite teas with a smaller guest list and a visible tension in the smiles. Their little world constricted like a lung with less air. They had tried to make me helpless by leaving me at an airport. I made them helpless by making their comforts quietly unreliable. There is a peculiar cruelty in being ignored. I saw it reflected in them often. Small, petty things to the outside world, but catastrophic to people running on social currency. The man who once called himself a provider now checked his emails and flinched. The woman who loved the scent of brand new wallpaper found herself with fewer invitations to install it anywhere. Then the legal repercussions arrived. I'd kept careful records and shared them with a solicitor who owed me a favor years ago. He didn't need theatrics. He needed evidence. When the authorities began to ask questions, they asked with the power of procedure behind them. Slow, thorough, inevitable. My son was called into a formal inquiry about assets. His wife had to account for transfers between accounts. The records showed patterns that were not innocent. In the end, some fines were levied, some tax obligations unspooled, and creditors tuned to the change. It was enough to reshape their finances, to make them sign papers with lawyers present, to make them doubt each other in the privacy of their bed. Humiliation is not a crime, but it is the engine of change. When the world refuses to look at you as a source of comfort, your world narrows. Friends, who had once sat at their table, now sat at one across town. It's astonishing how quickly the support structure behind a person dissolves when trust decays. I did not orchestrate every ending. People's choices accelerated their collapses. My role was catalytic evidence, not puppet master. And yet there was the ache of family that never entirely disappeared. My child, the boy who texted me that he was helpless, sometimes reached out in secret. He would send a line, a photograph of a meal, the name of a song, and I knew he was not lost completely. But contact came with the brittle tone of a man who had been taught to avoid responsibility. He would not meet in public. He would not stand before what he had done. That is not something I could fix with legal forms. That was his own work to do. The day I encountered them in a seaside cafe, a final move had already been set into motion by other hands. Partners who had once smiled at them had grown stingy with credit. Their life there was tidy but not durable. They had a child now, a small bright thing with my son's eyes. And looking at that child was the strangest part of all. I felt neither triumph nor hatred at that first sight. I felt a slow internal calculus of what to do. Children are not their parents' crimes, and I would not use an innocent person as a weapon. But I also would not let the presence of a baby stop me from ensuring my life's wrongs were acknowledged. I did not storm into the cafe and accuse them. Instead, I sat at the next table and ordered tea. The waitress, a young woman with a sympathetic ear, brought the bill and left an open tab. I left quietly when they were distracted, took a photo of the license plate of her car, an odd detail, but useful, and made a note of their schedules. I did not want to look like a shadow. I wanted to be a fact. The endgame came not from a single stroke, but from the slow accumulation of facts and the decisions of public bodies not swayed by emotion. Their assets were challenged. The LLCs that had held properties were audited, and the transfers back to my name were demanded under careful legal argument. I had gathered provenance over the months, handwritten notes, escrow documents, messages that proved intent. It felt bureaucratic and righteous at the same time. There is a grim satisfaction in the quiet precision of legal remedy. It is not loud, but it is lasting. There was a moment in the courthouse years after that airport when my son's eyes met mine, and for the first time he did not look away. He stood hollowed, his face the shadow of what it used to be. His wife sat beside him, her hand protective over a child not yet old enough to understand the walls that had been built. "You had your chance to do the right thing," I said softly in the corridor where echoes hide. He could not answer. He had none of the man he used to be in him anymore. The consequence was not the theatrical collapse I'd imagined as a young woman plotting revenge. They were not ruined in the tabloid sense. Their lives had been tightened, rewired, made careful. My mother retired from the board she used to co-chair. He went from a man who held influence to a man who learned that influence can be fragile. My son's name, once spared in family newsletters, was now a quiet word in private messages, a cautionary tale in family gatherings that would not mention me by name. In the end, I gained something I had not expected. Not only restitution, but the slow, steady rebuilding of myself. I reclaimed my home, the small apartment I'd kept in reserve, and turned it into a place of books, plants, and small routines that honored the woman I had been before they tried to rewrite my story. My son's text in an airport faded into the background as a prologue rather than an ending. He had left me physically, but he had not taken everything. I recovered the financial stability they'd assumed would be theirs. I reasserted my name in the records that had been quietly adjusted. There are nights when I think about the cruelty of abandonment and the strange ironies of life, that the same hands who once held you can become the hands that let you go, and that family can be both refugee and weapon, that revenge is often less an act and more a series of steadfast choices. If the story has a moral, it is not that violence begets violence. It is that dignity can be reclaimed through patience and precision, not spectacle. When people ask me, if they ever ask, why I did it, I tell them that I had to choose between being a ghost or being a witness. They cast me off because it was convenient. I cast them back into consequence because nothing in a life built on theft should be comfortable. I did it quietly. I did it with the care of someone who knows a thing cannot be regained by yelling but can be recovered by persistence. So if you ever find yourself abandoned at a terminal, with a single message on your phone, and the world moving on as if you have been erased, remember this. Some things cannot be taken without leaving a trail. The cleverness of others will show up in the paperwork. The small cruelties they use to hide their cowardice will translate into something useful if you are patient enough to collect them. And one day, perhaps when a cup of tea cools in a seaside cafe, you will find them. Not with a microphone and a spotlight, but with a gentle, inexorable set of facts that will not let them sleep as they once did. They left me at the airport to make me helpless. I made them live with my answer. It was neither the sweetest nor the bloodiest revenge. It was the one that lasted.